Thank you so much, Professor Ram. It is always great to hear you. Once again, Andarki Namaskaram. So whatever I speak, because I'm from this place, Vijayawada, and I studied here, grown up here. I've seen how the progress that has been happening for several years. So my presentation, can I have the slides up, please? So my presentation is going to completely relate what the Andhra context in the global scenario and the global setting. And I'll focus more from the data to the policy. And thank you so much, Professor Ram, for highlighting that very specific piece on the difference between that intended fertility and the actual fertility, because that makes a lot of sense. When we talk about the policy, we need to actually consider what is the intention, what is the desire, and what is the wantedness of the couples in Andhra Pradesh. So I'll take just about 12 minutes from now so that I can cover all my slides. So the first concern, and I'm going to talk about the three major concerns that is actually can inform very well the population management policy. One, the first concern is the declining fertility in Andhra Pradesh. As you can see from this slide, on the left side, it's more about C-sections and the sterilization, hysterectomy. They may be partially responsible for the difference in the actual fertility size. One might ask, how does it is affecting? It is affecting because the birthing experience is not that great. Fraternity help improve the birthing experience, and what is that we need to do? As you can see from the left side graph, those who had C-sections, their actual fertility is much lower than the intended fertility. But those who had the normal deliveries, the actual fertility is completely matching with the intended fertility. On the right side, you see the modern contraceptive prevalence rate in Andhra, as each of you know, about 70%. And all these 70%, out of 70%, 69% are actually the female sterilization. No state in the country or no country in the world has that kind of numbers. Imagine the 15 to 49 married women, 70% of them have already been sterilized. So who are the population that we are talking about when we are talking about increasing the fertility? So these are the points that you need to consider. And not just that, just as numbers in order to compare with Andhra, with other states in India, as you can see, Andhra Pradesh tops the first in female sterilization, first in hysterectomy happening at a very young age. It's about the money, it's about the medicalization, and this high medical intervention in women through the reproductive life cycle. And you might ask, did this not happen in other countries? It did happen. And how did the other countries' policies respond to is what this slide I'm going to talk about. For example, if you take Sweden, they have regulated the C-sections. And they actually promoted strong midwifery-led care in order to improve and have the positive birth experience and reduce the speed of increase in the C-section rate. And C-section rate in Sweden stands at 17%. The same is the France. You look at the hysterectomy rates, because the hysterectomy rates were completely on the rise, and they have addressed that issue through encouraged alternative treatments before going into the hysterectomy as a last stage option. And in Iran and also in China, with the change in policy, looking at the fertility decline, they have actually responded to how the family planning program needs to be. Before the three-child policy in China, or even two-child policy which came back in China, the sterilization was the only predominant and is a very coarse method that was used. So what can Andhra do? One, I would say regulate the healthcare, mainly to see that how the over-medicalization can be reduced in order to improve the women's reproductive care, so that the people and more of that encouragement within the medical setting, especially in private sector, because the C-section in private sector is more than 60%. That's way higher than what's the global recommendation for the C-section rates. And then the next, and so the critical point that the policy must talk about is that how the transformation in the health sector can happen within the state. The second point is they put brakes on female sterilization. The first thing that one can do, an immediate thing, is the suspension of incentives for both women and the healthcare workers, and promote access to the utilization of reversible contraceptive methods. Not to take out the female sterilization from the basket of choice of contraceptives, but it is more about how you respond and what way that you promote is what is going to be. And there are these country experiences of how policy has talked about what way that they responded to in this global scenario. The second concern, which is on the economic impact, also is on the, and this was something that was talked by my previous speakers and also were talked in the first session extensively, is the decrease in working age population. As you can see, the ones that are circled here is trying to compare the 10-year age group population in that 10 to 14 by 2021, the 20 to 24, these are from the projected population, is indicating the net out migration. And the current work participation rates are actually making the working age people from Andhra to migrate to other parts of India or other countries. And this may cause even an uneven age distribution to the population going forward. It's going to be increasing the elderly population, it's going to be increasing the dependency ratios. There are a lot of changes that are going to take place. So what the response needs to be and how the other countries have responded, and that's where even according to NFHS data, for example, the secondary infertility is approximately 15% among women because the work participation is one thing and then the economic insecurity is another thing. So we need to go into the nuances whenever we are actually designing the policy when it comes to the population management and how the other countries have responded. And I like the Vietnam example much more than any other country in the world, because Vietnam in a way reflects what the Indian setting was. And how they have responded over time in terms of with the changing demographic situation. So in the case of Vietnam, it's a strong economic reforms that have taken place, industrialization, urbanization, but then they gave a lot of emphasis on the skill development. What do we need in Andhra today is more about the skilling of young people. And skilling is the only solution in order to, because if you look at the fertility pattern, it's in some countries and in some contexts, it's kind of a U-shaped. The illiterate population with a low income or the low standard of living wealth will have higher fertility. And that high fertility only returns when the couples are guaranteed with very high education and higher income. That's when they can actually realize what their intended fertility is. And that's what is going to be the key. And that's what is Vietnam has taken those appropriate steps by skilling and ensuring that economic development that takes place in Vietnam to improve the labor force participation rates. And so is France. For example, they have high investments in education and research and engagement with the diaspora, which my other speakers have spoken about. And did it help? It actually helped, because the country received not only the talent and the brain drain that has happened from France, but also it actually has received many of those, it has encouraged the immigration that actually helped in progress. So what can Andhra policy, population management policy can do is the investment in youth education and skilling. Because we are talking about tomorrow. We are not talking about, and we are talking about those young people who have to, because if you're looking at the currently married women, 70% sterilized. So it's only about 30% of the population. And then the huge youth which are going to enter into the active reproductive transition is what you need. And then promote entrepreneurship to control the brain drain and also increase the economic growth. And the infertility, which I think we have Dr. Saeed Unisa, who is expert on it, who will talk more on that one. So the third concern, which Professor Ram also has pointed about, is the multitude of reasons for fertility decline. They include beyond the migration, beyond the delayed age at marriage, beyond the childbearing and the child rearing. It also relates to how the youth perceptions change and what do today's youth want, and how many children that the youth actually wants, and in what way that they can make that change. And world over, globally, the government policies have evolved to this fertility change. The change has happened. Many countries are now have been much more vocal, and from that context, Andhra is in a way a visionary in making this policy to help think about how to raise or maintain that which is the population stabilization. And you can see from this slide how different countries have been responding. So let me take a very specific case study approach, because it has to be, any policy design has to be informed by the evidence. What has happened in Hungary, for example, the policy is focused on incentivizing the childbirth, the financial support, as you can see from this slide, the maternity and family allowances, and also that has actually helped increase the fertility in a short term. But then that didn't sustain. So the past trend of the fertility decline actually came back and has reduced. And that's when is the collapse of the Soviet Union also, which led to further sharp economic downturn and poverty, which actually was the factor for reducing the fertility further in Hungary. But then the change in the government with a strong demographic focus that has happened in 2010, with a lot of these policies, including the tax credits, the family allowance, and universal maternity care. So those are the ones. So on the other hand, France is the best example, because that's the country which has maintained the fertility for over time, and it's the only country in the Europe which has the highest fertility rate. And the way that they could do happened much before 1960s with more of the pro-natalist policies, but that included even the expansion of the family benefits to universal family allowance. And then still, despite that, the fertility has declined till the point where the couples have desired to have certain number of children. And then that continued family allowance and the addition of the work-life balance, because also to tell you and link it to the Andhra Pradesh policy, is that Andhra is at a very different economic situation than France. What was it in 1980s? So you have to take that into consideration, and government's full support for the cost of IVF in order to address the infertility issues have helped continue to either maintain or raise the total fertility rate for a little more over time. Yes, 2 more slides, and that is it. And then the Hungary and France are one of the best examples, but then there are many other countries, and everybody, when we talk about the fertility change, people immediately pick up this Japan, South Korea, China, and Spain. And from my perspective, as an individual researcher, I might receive so much of contradiction about it, and my point can be debated. But then these are not the best countries when we want to take a look at what the population management policy need to be. Because these countries actually have, but the reasons for why the change has not happened is the one that we need to most careful be about. So these countries had similar policies. There are a lot of cash incentives, cash was given, but the evidence did suggest that they didn't really work. The reason why they didn't work is because, in any of these countries, you look at that last column, the most possible reasons include the long working hours, lack of flexibility at work, or the high job insecurity, high education costs for children. So the people, the young population or the youth have started thinking, removed maternity leave benefits introduced, maternity leave benefits introduced, workplace flexibility, childcare support that has. So, and what is the learnings from all this, from the global programs and policies, from the context for the Andhra Pradesh, is the policy focus on promoting non-invasive maternity care. There is these stars that you're seeing here is the strength of evidence that exists in terms of how things have worked and what it has worked. So the non-invasive maternity care, in order to improve the birthing experience, actually works, and increasing the availability of IVF services for the infertility, addressing infertility. Then the policy focus on education, that to quality education, skilling and entrepreneurship, is to reduce the net out migration, but also to return of the brain drain that has happened. Andhra is very proud of having so many CEOs outside, but then whether Andhra policy can actually create the opportunity for those CEOs to come and rebuild Andhra is the question that we need to answer. And then the putting women at the center of development with gender equality, the economic empowerment and child care all had strong evidence to suggest. And last but not the least, I would say that setting the specific goals with generating continuous data and tracking the progress, because the data is very weak after the bifurcation of Andhra Pradesh, and that's something that we need. And all the demographers sitting out here would echo with me that we need to create a data system, and that tracking needs to happen. Thank you so much. Over to you, Anand.
Thank you so much, Niranjan and Dr. Ram, for these extensive presentations and overview of sort of the global perspective. I'm going to talk about two specific, I think, points. I'm going to try and keep it short. One is a little bit of a perspective on population dynamics and population management, and secondly, one very sort of specific set of recommendations around family planning, because that's the work or the field of work that I've mostly spent my life working in. So firstly, on sort of perspective building around population dynamics, yo-yo, cycling, Goldilocks, these are ways to think about population dynamics. Why do I say that? Because a yo-yo never stays still. It goes up and down. The question is, does it hit the ground or does it come up before it hits the ground, right? When does it go down? Okay, Goldilocks, she's always looking for that porridge, but it's too hot or it's too cold, right? Where will she find the right porridge that suits her? She keeps looking through the jungle, right? Cycling, you can't stand still on a cycle, right? There's a saying, to keep stable, you have to, or to keep your balance, you have to keep moving, right? So think of population dynamics in these frames. Don't think of population dynamics as being a population crisis. It's always in a crisis. Don't think of population as something that can be controlled. It can't be controlled, okay? Don't think even of population as something that can be stabilized, okay? There is no flatlining of population. It's always an up, down, up, down. All the charts that you've seen for the last couple of hours, look at population in the last 15 to 20 years. If you looked at it over the much longer period, you would see that there have been those ups and downs continuously through time. That's the nature of population as it exists. As we've also heard from many speakers, there are essentially three key dynamics or three key elements that influence population: birth rate, death rate, and the one that everyone is telling we keep on forgetting is migration, right? And migration is an important one because we're thinking about the boundary of an area. It's a country, it's a state, it's a place, right? If we didn't think about a boundary, we wouldn't need to think about migration. But because we've restricted ourselves to saying, okay, let's think about Andhra Pradesh, we're thinking about migration. It's an important third element. These are the three basic levers that one has at a very macro level. I'm not going to talk about the macro, I'm going to talk about the micro, and I'm going to focus on what is happening in that first lever around birth rate. And do we really have the levels of control to try and see how we can modulate that birth rate, the levers that we have? That's what I'm going to just focus on with a couple of slides and some very specific recommendations. So can I have my first? Okay, let me try. Okay, it works. It works. This is a slide that shows us, specifically within the field of family planning, what contraceptive method mix looks like in Andhra Pradesh, which is the first bar, in Maharashtra, in West Bengal, in Punjab, and then I've taken two neighboring countries as well, Bangladesh and Nepal. Two things I just want to point out from this thing. Really, there's just two highlights to point out. One is that the gray section, which is no contraceptive methods used, is floating at around the 30% mark, at around 1/3 in all of these places. In all of these places which have a similar TFR or a higher TFR, which is what we desire in Andhra Pradesh, it's still about 1/3 are not using a contraceptive method. But the big difference is that in Andhra Pradesh, the yellow bar is everything else. The yellow bar is sterilization. So there is only one method, almost only one method of contraception that's used in Andhra Pradesh compared to other states that's happening. There is no perfect method mix. There's no perfect method mix. We keep on saying, oh, we should have a method mix which is like this, almost equal numbers. They're not. Every method mix is context specific. People may want to use, in Punjab, people tend to use more condoms and pills. In West Bengal, it's much more about hormonal methods. It's different in different contexts, depending on what people want, etc. But the important thing is that as long as you have a method mix that looks at offering both permanent and spacing methods, you give your population, you give your household, you give women and couples the opportunity to take a decision on their own household decisions and family sizes, right? Unfortunately, the successes of our own family planning program in Andhra Pradesh, and don't forget this, what we're standing on is a situation of success. And we're now addressing that success in having a very, very effective family planning program, which we've built very, very carefully in Andhra Pradesh, right? We're now having to figure out how do we undo that. And the answer is actually quite simple. So I'm keeping it very, very micro level. I'm looking at family planning. I'm looking at one issue within family planning. It is to say, how do we take our foot off that accelerator that is pushing the sterilization button so hard in Andhra Pradesh? Next slide, please. Oh, whoops. So, there is no ideal method mix, as I'm saying, right? But having a mix means that you're giving choices to individuals and to couples, right? A mix of spacing and permanent methods allows us to actually think about population dynamics and population management. One of the problems we have in Andhra Pradesh is that with there's actually only 29% of women who are not using a contraceptive method. So if you want to increase fertility, you can only talk to 29% of the women in this state. Everyone else is sterilized. They don't have an option, right? At present, the state lacks that mix, right? So our options are limited, and this will take us time to turn around. There's also the problem of hysterectomies, which Niranjan also talked about. I just want to flag this, is that this is just, I was looking at this recently, this just seems really, really strange, and we need to do something to sort of figure out what is going on. Why is Andhra Pradesh off the charts even on hysterectomies? Okay, compared to so many other states, and I've not even listed the states that have, less than 2% hysterectomies here. There are many other states below that. Right? I've just listed the states that have higher than 2% hysterectomies. What is going on? Is it a market dynamics? Is it provider bias? Is it women's own preferences? Why is it that there's such a high level of hysterectomies happening in Andhra Pradesh? But this is also leading to that permanence of, permanent effect of sterilization, essentially. Right. So what can we do with family planning? I think, as Niranjan has said, I'm going to repeat the same thing. Reconsider the incentives around sterilization. What can we do to offer more options and create awareness about options? It will enable both better birth spacing and may also help actually increase the median age of sterilization, which is ridiculously low. It's 23.3 years. Couples are getting married, are having children, 1, 2, 3, 4, getting sterilized at 23. Okay? As a modern India, I would like to think of us getting married at the age of 23. Okay? But here we're having all our children and being done with our family at the age of 23. And figure out and address what's behind this high incidence rate of hysterectomies. The good news is that none of these issues are new. If you move around in the family planning circle, these are issues that we've been talking about as a community for decades. We've been celebrating Andhra Pradesh's progress in family planning, but people have been talking about the fact that why is it so dependent upon a single method. And the other good news is that we don't even need to look as far as Vietnam or France or Sweden. We know in our own backyard what to do to look at a more balanced family planning approach. It's not rocket science at all. We have the means easily within our reach. And we can address this quickly. This is not something that needs a 20-year, 25-year plan. Something like this can actually be done right away. And finally, my concluding slide, for population management, maybe it's not about thinking about an aggressive measure to increase fertility. But really, if you look at this chart over here, which is from the NFHS, the most recent NFHS, which is not that recent, but it is the most recent NFHS, which says, what is the ideal number of children? Amongst currently married women in Andhra Pradesh, the ideal number of children is 2.1. So if you let women choose and decide and have the means in their hands to actually decide their own fertility, our problems would frankly be solved, okay? So I would also say that let's be cautious about policy making and overbearing on the policy measures to control and to stabilize and to deal with a population crisis. It's not. It's a yo-yo, and if you leave the yo-yo in the hands of women and men to take care of and give them the means to make those decisions real, we'll actually not have this problem in the long term. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to our speakers for their invaluable contributions. Your expertise and perspectives have added immense value to this conference. As a token of our heartfelt appreciation, we would like to felicitate our esteemed session members with mementos. For this, we would like to invite Sri Anand Shankar, Joint Secretary to the Government, Planning Department, Andhra Pradesh, to kindly do the honors, sir.
Thank you, sir. With this, we wrap up the first part of the conference. It is now the time to take a short break and enjoy a delightful lunch. We invite all our guests to join us for lunch. Please note, lunch for all VIPs and delegates is arranged at the faculty lounge. Lunch for all other participants is arranged at the Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan block. Because of the paucity of time, we request you to kindly be back to the auditorium by sharp 2 p.m. Our volunteers are there to assist you with the location. Thank you.